Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we are live. Welcome to episode 1 in our Electric Light Orchestra series. We are looking at the debut album from 1971 and ELO II from 1973. We want to hear from you in the comments, in the chat. Let's do it.
Grant is changing the world one track at a time on Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Hey, welcome everybody. We are live, and it is a Monday, which is kind of odd. Well, we go live here on Mondays every now and then. But we are live tonight, and we are talking ELO. I want to welcome two fellow contrarians. We've got Marco, and we've got the Parish. So, gentlemen, how are you? This may cancel this show out, the fact that this is kind of like a contrarians offshoot show. Maybe not. Anyway, I want to welcome these two gentlemen. And how are you?
You're good? Great.
You're
honored
great.
to be on your show.
Well, you've been on it before. Of course, the Parish has been on there. But anyway, tonight we are starting a ELO series. So we are looking at the first two ELO albums. So the way I've been running these, when we do these type of shows, I do want to include everybody in the chat. If you know these records, we do want to hear your rating on these. But when it's time, I'll let you know. Anyway, we got a heart already. Let's look. Look, Michael Ladano gave us a little heart. Look at him. He's so romantic. Anyway, let's see who's in the chat real quick. Let's see. Well, the Parish is here. There you go, Michael. Mark is very popular and, with his fan base. Tyler, nice to see you. Zappa, there you go. Nice to see you. Anyway, let's get started. We'll bring you guys in when it gets time. We'll get more people in, I would assume, unless people hate ELO. Who knows? You do these shows, you never know what's going to happen. So anyway, gentlemen, how are you? What's your experience with ELO? I mean, how did you get into them, for one? I know both of these gentlemen are big fans, but what was like your gateway drug, or how did you become like a ELO fan?
You want to go first, Parish?
Go ahead. Oh,
yeah, I can do. Yeah,
it's open.
So, my first memory of ELO is 1974, I guess. ELO played at the town hall, which at the where I lived, which was Watford, northwest of London, and they did a gig there, and I didn't go to the gig. I'd have been 9, so I was a bit young. And I wish I had gone, because actually they had Mark Bolan on for the encore, and they did the Chuck Berry song. What's it called?
Roll Over Beethoven.
Roll Over Beethoven. Yeah, so he came on for the encore for Roll Over Beethoven, and we'll come back to probably Mark Bolan a bit later when we talk about the albums, because he had a part to play on some of the tracks. So, and the poster was the cover of ELO II, and that poster was on a bus shelter, fly poster that was on the bus shelter for a good 12 months, and I used to use that bus shelter every day to go to school. So every day I would see that, and I used to think that was the coolest thing going. I didn't know who ELO were, but I was into science fiction. I thought that was the coolest thing going, and so that was kind of my introduction to ELO. But and I heard a few of the singles and whatever. But my real introduction was with an album we'll pick up on a future episode, which was this. Yeah. So my first real introduction was New World Record, and that was one of the first albums I ever bought. That really what got me into ELO, and then I went backwards, and we'll talk about it. But I went backwards and bought the albums subsequently, and I've been a fan ever since. So
there you go.
Saw them live once, which was at Hyde Park about 10 years ago when Jeff Lynne's ELO first started. It was kind of their comeback, really. There was a DJ that had sort of promoted that he should reform ELO, which he did for that for that one-off outside show at Hyde Park. It was a big success. So I've only ever seen them once, but I have got tickets to see them at Birmingham for one of their last shows. I think it's either in June or July. So I've got tickets for that as well. So yeah, big ELO fan.
All right, cool.
Awesome.
Marco, what was your whole beginning with ELO?
Well, mine's kind of like happenstance, because like I'm a little bit younger than when they were around in their prime, and I'm from North America. But and they had a big presence in North America, certainly with like their big hits and stuff like this. And like I was aware of like Evil Woman, but as a kid, obviously I was a fan of Kiss. Like as a kid, I think a lot of kids probably introduction to music is Kiss because of the visuals and all that excitement. So I was a big Kiss fan, and I picked up a book called Black Diamond 2, which was like a record collecting guide to like Kiss albums. And in it was they showed the cover of the Wizard Brew album with Roy Wood. And I actually kind of got into ELO like through that phase of like Roy Wood move first. And then I kind of had that backdoor entry into ELO. So I actually kind of got into them the way that they kind of like came about. Because at first I was like, oh, what's this? I listened to Wizard. I went back. I was a big fan of Roy Wood, listened to all the Move albums, and then discovered ELO and kind of got into it that way. Otherwise, I was aware of the hits before that, Evil Woman. You know what I mean? Like those kind of songs. But other than that, that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah. So a lot of people may not know this, but the ELO coexisted with the Move. So we had a lot of line. I'm not going to go into the whole history of the Move or anything, unless someone else on the panel wants to go into it. But we had some lineup changes. Eventually, I think Roy Wood was always in charge of the Move, but he brought in Jeff Lynne from the band The Idle Race, and the whole goal was to finish up the Move contract and start ELO. So the whole concept of ELO, from what I understand, was to carry on from where the Beatles kind of left off with like Strawberry Fields and Magical Mystery Tour, that type of material. Now, when you listen to this first album, I hear a lot of that. It's kind of picks up right where Strawberry Fields leaves off, or I'm the Walrus, take your pick. But the thing is, this album was recorded at the same time that Message from the Country was recorded, which was the final Move album. So they were recorded at the same time. They do have a similar tonality when I listen to it. But we're going to just take a look at these records, and the way we're going to do it like we always do. I'm going to throw it around to the panel. They're going to give us their comments on the record, and then I'll go to everybody in the chat. We'll take our ranking out of 10, and we're going to say, hey, is this an album that we could recommend? Because I love to keep everybody in the chat involved. That's what's fun about the Warehouse. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go with Marco was here first, and then the Parish. Let's just go over to Marco. What's your whole thoughts on this whole record? Or if you want to talk about the Move or anything, just the platform is yours.
Yeah, I don't want to like go through every single Move record, but I do kind of want to talk about I want to talk about the ending of the Move, from going from Message from the Country into ELO, because it is a little convoluted, because there was some things going on contractually with the Move, Roy Wood, Bev Bevan, and Jeff Lynne, who at this point, when Message from the Country came out, were the Move. The three of them were the Move, and they were contractually obligated to continue on as the Move. And the Move was supposed to continue as a recording band, and ELO was supposed to be like a performing band. So they weren't going to perform. Apparently, if you go back and listen to interviews, read books and stuff like this, the ELO was supposed to coexist with the Move, but the Move was going to be positioned more of like a recording band. They were going to be putting out singles as the Move was ELO was putting out albums and performing. There was some convolution, which is interesting when you look at when Roy left ELO, because they were still contractually obligated to exist as the Move, which only existed for a short period of time before the record contract let them out of that deal, because Roy Wood had formed Wizard. Jeff Lynne was kind of heading ELO at that point. Anyways, I'm moving a little bit ahead here. Jeff Lynne had joined the Move under the guise of eventually they were going to disband the Move and create a new project, which became ELO. ELO was Roy Wood's brainchild. He became the leader of the move through some posturing and positioning and maybe some politics, because there were some other guys at the beginning of the move, if you remember, like Ace Kefford and stuff like this. There were some other guys, and there was some posturing and things like this. I think Ace kind of was removed from the band or whatever happened with him, but I think he kind of saw himself as a leader at one point. Carl Wayne kind of saw himself as a leader at one point. There was a lot of personality conflicts. That's basically what dissolved the move after Shazam. So when they had formed this new move with Jeff Lynne, it was kind of to get some new foundation to it, like a new band kind of going, which ended up becoming ELO, which was Roy Wood's brainchild. I have heard the Beatles sentiment before that this was going to be a continuation of the Beatles. However, I don't think that's what their the idea was at the time. Roy had bought a cheap like Chinese cello from like a pawn shop, and if anybody's familiar with Roy Wood, and I don't want to ramble too long, but he's, him and Jeff Lynne are excellent multi-instrumentalists. Roy Wood's the kind of guy who could pick up an instrument and fiddle with it for a while and then kind of be able to play it comparably. So he picked up this cello, and just that kind of, when he started messing around with the cello, it inspired him to kind of move towards a rock band that featured a heavy string section or an orchestral section, because he was heavily influenced by Stravinsky and stuff like this when he was young. He listened to a lot of orchestral music as a kid, and that's kind of what got him into music and all the multi-instrumentalist stuff like this. Jeff also happened to be a competent multi-instrumentalist, and if you look at the credits of the first album, they both play a lot of instruments. Anyways, so it was Roy Wood's idea to kind of create this string section rock pop band that was influenced by the Beatles. And if you listen to Look at Me Now and compare it to songs like Eleanor Rigby and stuff like this, I mean, some of the melodies are kind of interchangeable. So there was stuff like that going on. They were definitely influenced by the Beatles. And the name ELO came from the BBC Light Orchestra, I think. It was the BBC Light Orchestra, the BLO or something. Roy kind of took the name. So a lot of this is interesting because it was Roy's brainchild. However, Jeff became the leader of the ELO. Right. The first album, to me, you're right on the money, Grant. And again, I don't want to ramble too long, but
no, you're all right. You're good.
It's one of my favorite ELO albums. I'm not trying to be contrarian. The reason that I say that, because later ELO, like if you take what ELO became, my favorite album's Time. I love listening to Time start to finish. I love a lot of the independent songs on a lot of the albums leading up to Time, but that's probably my favorite ELO album, other than the first album, but only because the first album to me reminds me of the Move. It's an extension of the Move, which is one of my favorite bands. And you're absolutely right. Message from the Country was recorded at the same time as the first ELO album, and the songs are very interchangeable. Message from the Country could be switched over with Overture 10358. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of songs that could be flipped back. Words of Aaron could have been an ELO song. You know what I mean? And vice versa. Like there's a lot of songs that could go back and forth with those two albums. So to me, the first ELO album is actually more of like a sister album to Message from the Country than even Looking On is, which at the time went from Looking On to Message from the Country, then it became ELO. But I kind of consider those Message from the Country and ELO being more sister albums. I love this first ELO album. It's one of my favorite albums. And a lot of rock critics at the time, I think, were putting that Beatles thing on them. A lot of rock critics, and I watched a documentary that you can watch for free on like Tubi TV it's actually about that early 70 to 73 ELO era, the Roy Wood era. So it's a fascinating documentary that only focuses on that. A lot of the rock critics listened to the first ELO album and said, oh my God, these guys are the next Beatles. So a lot of that kind of got put on them, but they were heavily influenced by the Beatles. And I know like John Lennon, I heard an interview with John Lennon where he talked about how he thought Roy Wood is a great songwriter and stuff like this. So he was definitely aware of Roy Wood and the Move and things like this. So are we just going to talk about the album, like go through the songs, and should I throw it over to Parish now, or?
No, talk about
went on for a while.
No, you're good. We'll get Marco up to date, won't we? We'll get him with the game plan, won't we, Parish?
I've got a couple of things to add.
Go ahead, Parish.
What Marco's just said. So the first thing that might be a bit of gossip really is I used to work with a guy who was a roadie with the Move, sort of 79 through to when they stopped. And he said that Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne were always arguing. He said they got on, but from a musical point of view, they always had a different view of what should be going on and what they should be doing. And that he was surprised when they went off to form a band together, because he thought that when the Move split, they would split up. He told me some other things which I won't go into because I'm not sure I'm allowed. I should do really, but he enjoyed his time with them. He said that actually Jeff Lynne, he never thought Jeff Lynne would be that famous because he was always in the background. Always a bit of a shrinking violet, and I think you can probably understand that from everything he's done since in production. And that Roy Wood was definitely the front man of the Move and the mover, if you pardon the pun, with the band. He was very complimentary about Bevan. In all he used to say to me was he was just a really nice guy. That's about all he ever said.
With a really low voice. With a very low voice.
With a very low voice, yeah. But they, and of course they come from Birmingham, which is just up the road from where I am as well. So I'm kind of in ELO country, I suppose, from that point of view. And just picking up, the band. I mean, light orchestra just means a small orchestra, and there was lots of light orchestras. So you would have a light orchestra at the BBC had their light orchestra for various programs. But there'd be a lot of theatres and places that would also have their light orchestras, and therefore the Electric Light Orchestra was a bit of a play on that because they obviously added the electric guitar and the bass and electrified what an orchestra would be doing with electric cellos, etc. So it was done as a bit of a play on words. The other thing I might just mention is, it's because of ELO that I learnt to play the cello. When I was about 12, I had, and at this point ELO were pretty big, and you'd see videos of them top of the pots, and you'd see the cello players running around the stage holding the cellos, playing them, and that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a rock cellist. I wasn't very good though, so I never really made it very far. Played in the school orchestra. And that was about it, really. And then flipped over to the drums because I just found the drums was an easier instrument.
Parish, it's hard to be a rock. It's hard to be a rock cellist when you're trying to learn the cello and running around on the stage.
Yeah.
You probably should have sat down.
I should have done. Yeah. I think that might have been the mistake. But anyway, so I can play the cello a little bit, and that's all down to ELO. So so that's my bit to add. Oh, the other thing I would just say is, I think it's quite interesting that Roy Wood left ELO because he wanted to go more experimental. And then he forms Wizard, and you couldn't get a more more traditional rock and roll, sort of almost pop rock type band, really. So still had a lot of orchestral instruments in Wizard. I don't know if Wizard did anything in the States. I mean, they were pretty big over here, had a few top 5 hits, a couple of number ones, and looked fantastic with his long hair and the pre-Kiss face makeup, etc. So very iconic. And if people haven't seen anything by Wizard, it's definitely worth watching a few clips on YouTube. They're certainly a lot of fun. But it's I just find it odd that he left because he felt that Jeff Lynne was making him too commercial, and then he goes off and does a band that's even more commercial.
I read some things about Don Arden, which he was the management, and there were issues because Roy didn't get along with Don, and that was a problem. And also, everybody was paying attention to Roy and not giving Jeff any of the spotlight. So that was a problem. But I thought it was one of the reasons was just because Roy didn't want to deal with Don Arden anymore.
That might be the case as well. I mean, what I read, because obviously all you pick up is stuff you either read on the internet or whatever. But what I read was partly the direction. There was actually musical differences on where they wanted to go. But as I say, what was that? A lot of
What's that? Oh, wait a minute. The Parish plays cello. We have a lot of drummers here too. Christian, anybody else?
So
anyway, so
I think maybe the musical differences bit was also planted by the guy I used to work with, Dave. Maybe he he planted that thought in my head as well.
So anyway, Parish, since you're up, what's your thoughts on this first ELO album, and then what you like, what you don't like, rate it out of 10?
All right. Well, what I do like, I love the opener. 10538, I think, is a fantastic opener, and sounds like the ELO that they'd become later. I think it's a great song. It was a big hit. I think it got in the top 10 in the UK. I love the cello on it. I think it's really good. But I don't think it sounds particularly like the rest of the album. I think it's really the only song on the album that I would say sounds like later ELO, really. And then after that, I think the album mostly is really weird. A lot of it sounds as if it could be a soundtrack to a film, or it sounds almost like a modern classical music. Yes, there's quite a bit of Beatles nods, but I think whilst the vocals and some of the melodies sound like the Beatles, actually it's not that melodic in the same way as the Beatles songs were, and certainly some of the musical passages almost sound to me as if they're jamming and just playing without any real view of what they're playing or what they're doing. I really like Nelly Takes Her Bow. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's just because it sounds a little bit like something you might have on Fantasia, Walt Disney's Fantasia film, that kind of thing. It's kind of got that feel to it. Very, very dramatic. Certainly when I was younger, and I suppose still the case with it, I kind of liked the elephant noises in the middle as well. I thought that was quite clever, the way they do all of that with the instruments. And I think Jeff Lynne's vocals are really good on it as well. I think one of the highlights of the album is Jeff Lynne's voice and the songs that he did. I have to say the Battle of Marston Moor I find odd and can't really get into. It sounds like a concept piece really to me, rather than anything I would normally listen to. And I think that's probably the case in point with this album. If it wasn't ELO, I probably wouldn't be listening to it really. But because I like ELO, I will come back and listen to the album. And when I got the album, I got this. It was a double pack of the first two albums together, and that's the inside of it. So I've lived with this for a long time. I mean, I've had this since 75, 76, something like that. So I've lived with it for a long time, and as I say, I love ELO, so I love the album. But it's not something I would listen to. I think if it wasn't an ELO. Mr. Radio, I think, is really good. I like that. Sounds like a 1920s, almost the sort of thing Queen would do, whimsical song. And I found it quite interesting thinking about it today. That when that came out, that would have been 50 years since that 1920s music sound was in vogue, and now it's 50 years since ELO did the album. Or over 50 years since ELO did the album. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's if you take 100 years ago, this album, that song is right in the middle of it, which I found quite interesting. But I like it, and I like the musical break in the middle, which I think again doesn't sound like the rest of the song particularly, but is very dramatic. Yeah. So that's kind of my view on the album. If I was to say overall,
yeah,
I would say I really like the album, but I wouldn't listen to it if it wasn't ELO, I think. And generally that type of music is not music that I would go and listen to. But because it's ELO, and because I have lived with it for 50 odd years,
right,
and because I really like it, it's an 8 out of 10 for me.
So what you give it a what?
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
All right.
Yeah.
8 out of 10. That's fair enough.
I think if I listened to, if it was anybody else, I'd be giving it a lot less. But because
Parish,
it's ELO, and I've lived with it for so long, I can't, and I love it. I do love the album, so there you go.
Parish, I totally get what you're saying, because if I'm going to listen to anything from this era, I'm going to go listen to Message to the Country, and not this. There's a lot of instrumentals on here. What here is great is the songwriting up to snuff as if we're going to compare it to a Move album. Maybe. I almost kind of listen to this record as opposed to almost like an experiment to see what they can do. They put it out. It's great. It's well executed, but is it as good as Message from the Country? Just throwing it out there, or Looking On. Maybe, maybe not. We're going to ask Marco what he thinks and get his opinion. Marco, what you look at this record, you compare it to Message from the Country. What do you think? How do you look at this debut album? What do you like? What do you not like? And what's your rating out of 10? And then we're going to ask everybody in the chat.
Yeah, I love that Parish is here because I think we have different perspectives, but I would also rate it an 8 out of 10. But like when I look at the track listing, 10538 to me sounds more like the Move than later ELO. And actually like when I look at the album, a song like Nelly Takes Her Bow, especially, the more commercial like part with the verses and stuff like this, that sounds more like later ELO to me. I know it does get progressive and it goes into like a classical kind of breakdown thing. Nelly Takes Her Bow. Mr. Radio, that sounds like a more later ELO song to me than an early. Actually, of the first two albums, Mr. Radio reminds me the most of ELO.
That's a Jeff Lynne track, so makes sense.
But like Overture and Look at Me Now and songs like that kind of remind me more of like the Move, Message from the Country. And I probably would give Message from the Country like a 9 out of 10 and this like an 8 out of 10. This is almost like a more experimental version of Message from the Country, but not too much. Actually, ELO II is even more experimental. That's even more progressive because the songs, there's only 5 tracks on that one, and every song is like 8 minutes on that one. So that one's even, this one, like all the songs are still pretty like 5 minutes, 3 minutes. You know what I mean? They don't get that. They are progressive, but not that progressive. I do like the Battle of Marston Moor. I don't know why, but I do. The only song I think track not the biggest fan of, but will still listen to it and still enjoy listening to it is probably First Movement Jumping Biz, only because it's kind of like a copy of Classical Gas. I can't stop thinking about Classical Gas when I listen to it. So to me, that's the only song out of the whole album that I'm kind of like, this has already kind of been done. Other than that, I think an overlooked track is Queen of the Hours. I think that's an epic tune. That I believe they did that one live. There's a live show with Roy, and I think they did Queen of the Hours live. But for me, it's like an 8 out of 10. I enjoyed listening to this album more the more I listened to it. And that might be because of my introduction to ELO was from the Move. I didn't go backwards. I think some folks, and I'm not saying this is Parish's story, but I think some folks who listen to those later 70s songs, like, the big hits, Don't Bring Me Down and things like this, Turn to Stone even, and like songs like that, and then go back and listen to some of the stuff on this, like Manhattan Rumble and Whisper in the Night. It's gonna be like, what is this? This isn't. But for me, it was kind of like, oh, cool. This is more the Move that's kind of transforming, and they're being a little more experimental, using a little bit more string instead of like horn, which is funny because Roy Wood went on to go use a whole horn section in Wizard. Instead of like a strings. Oh, he had strings, but they did play in the States, Wizard. They didn't have any big hits over there, but they did play Don Kirshner's rock concert. There's a whole video of it.
Yeah, Parish. Those Wizard albums came out on United Artists, and Parish, they went straight in the cutout bins. No one bought them. They weren't successful,
But they were the same way. He went the same way as most glam rock bands from the UK went, I think.
It's so odd how Roy Wood never had any success in the States. I mean, even if you look at The Move, they were kind of like an underground British invasion band. Like, I think they had a little bit of underground credibility. Like, some musicians appreciated The Move, but they didn't really do much in the States either. And they went over and they played in San Francisco. I think they played the Fillmore East. There's a whole Move album at the Fillmore East live, but they didn't really do much either. But and neither did Wizard, and neither did I don't think ELO really did while Roy Wood was in ELO anyway. No. But and I do have some things to say about Don Arden and Roy leaving, but I think we'll get to that when we get to
we'll
ELO
get to that
too, right?
Yeah, we can get to that then.
The other thing I forgot to mention earlier is I think the last track almost sounds like a hymn, the way it plays, and even the lyrics when he talks about the angel shines white and through God gave the world, etc. It's almost like they've written a hymn, which is very unusual, I think, for a rock band to do. I mean, I like the song. I just found it a bit odd with it. And the other thing, just coming back to The Move for a moment, I mean, again, like quite a lot of the 70s glam rock bands, very influential. I mean, Fire Brigade led to Kiss. I mean, Kiss were a Move fan, and Firehouse was their version of Fire Brigade when they wrote it. That's why they wrote it. Cheap Trick, huge fans of Roy Wood in particular. Hence the cover versions of songs like California Man. And when Cheap Trick played Hammersmith Odeon in 1980, Roy Wood came on for the encore. I was there, and Roy Wood came on for the encore, and they did California Man as the encore with Roy Wood on it. And that was fantastic. Not that you'd recognise it was Roy Wood, because he'd cut all his hair. He didn't particularly look like him. He didn't have all the long hair that he had when he was in Wizard. But that was really good. One of my favourite moments of live concerts was seeing him play that with Cheap Trick. So I think they had an influence. I think you're right, Marco, that they were a bit of an underground band with certain artists, but yeah, never really broke it. Whereas over here, they had a number of top 10 hits, and one of the things that sort of kept them in the sort of public awareness is that Radio 1, which is the big radio station in the UK, the very first song that was played was Blackberry Way by The Move. So that comes up regularly on quiz shows and things like and pub quizzes and things like that. So that's kind of kept The Move in the public memory.
All right, cool. All right, so real quick, before we move on to the next record, and before I want to reach out to everybody in the chat, if you know this record, and give us a rating. The way I look at the first ELO album, it is much more closely aligned to The Move than anything. And, for everyone always talking about how Jeff Lynne has that big, heavy-duty production sound, Roy Wood even has a bigger production sound, because this totally sounds like Roy Wood for the most part. It sounds like The Move with strings. I just don't think that maybe I think that they probably use a lot of more of their better material for message from the country than they used here. I don't have a problem with this record, but I never returned to it. There's a lot of instrumentals on it. The production's great. If you like Message from the Country, you probably like this. But if you're a person who likes Face the Music, or you like one of those later ELO albums, Time, this might not be up your alley. And if we're going to turn you on to something, I don't know if I'd start on the debut. Now, if you're a Move fan, hey, feel free. Go ahead and check it out. So that's kind of how I look at it. But I don't return to this record. But every time I play it, though, I just kind of go, yeah, I like it. And it's one of those albums you need to listen to over and over again. It's not one of those for me that you hear it and you just go, oh my God, it's a masterpiece. Because I don't really think this is a masterpiece. I think it's great that they're onto something, but I'm not sure if this was not fully realized. I think what Jeff ended up doing, we got to New World Record. I think that he perfected it. He might even got closer to the whole concept buy the second album. I don't know. We're going to check. So if I was going to probably rate this out of 10, I would probably give it a, I love the movie. I'd probably give it a 7.5. Now, everybody in the chat who knows this record, now's your time. How would you rate this out of 10? And we'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and we'll take that tally, and then we'll go over and talk about ELO II. You know, everybody here knows how we do this. So does anybody here? Okay. We got Richard's giving it a 7.5. All right. We've got a 6.5 from Steven. All right. Al's giving it a 7. Yeah, we're kind of in that same ballpark. We got there's 4 7s. Okay.
Come on, let's bump them up 7.5, folks.
That'll be good. I can keep that. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we got another 7. All right. Well, at least I can add those easily. All right. I went backwards from Face of Music, so a 6 for me. Okay. See, it might have a lot to do with when you came in on things.
Do we have any votes from anyone who never heard the album?
Well,
probably.
I don't know. Jan's giving it an 8 out of 10.
Based on what we said, Marco, they're giving it a 7.
Ken White's going to go with a 7.5. Yeah, but 7 point. These aren't bad scores by any means. Annie T has never heard the album. Well, she's very sheltered. Webb hadn't heard it in 5 years. That's all right. If you don't know the record, we're just trying to, for anybody else watching the show, we just want to kind of give them something to go with. I'd give it, we can't take you don't know the record. All right, I'm good with what we've got. Let's calculate our scores. Thanks everybody for chiming in. That can't be right. Oh, that couldn't be right because that wouldn't be right. Oh my God, hold on. Oh, it gave me a 9 because I did it wrong. Hold on. Hold on. All right, now let's see what we got. We get a 7.2, which sounds about right. Oh, wait a minute. BM Bolt.
That's fair.
That sounds like a fair review.
That's
and
fair,
then Byron's giving
I'm a fanboy, so it's fair.
Byron's giving it a 5.5. Pop is giving it a 7.43.
Like I would get it if somebody rated it like a 4, I would get it.
All right.
It can't be hard to listen to, even though
go ahead.
The funny thing is it's pretty poppy too. I mean, like a lot of the songs are like pop songs that like progress into these orchestral music pieces, but like there's a lot of poppy stuff on it. It's kind of interesting.
I think
the second album is way more progressive.
I think if you cut out those digressions, it's actually quite a good pop album. But if you don't like that classical music side, I can see how that would turn people off it.
A 3 on the name alone. So you're rating them on the... Come on now. All right, so there you go, 7.3. All right, let's go on to the next record. I'm going to throw it over to Marco. You want to start talking about it? Because you were going to mention the whole Don Arden thing. And go ahead, Marco, take it away.
Let me clarify this a little bit, because I've watched documentaries. I've read a book. I've read this Roy Wood book that talks about ELO and when he left Roy Wood, or when he left Roy Wood, when he left ELO and stuff like this. Anyways, and I've listened to radio interviews with Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne at the time, like when this stuff was happening. So like and this stuff exists on YouTube, folks, so you can go and find this stuff. There's lots of information. So Roy Wood, yes, I think Grant was saying that Roy was getting a lot of the publicity. So they were doing interviews and newspaper articles were coming out saying Roy Wood's ELO, right? Which obviously, if you look at the first album, Jeff Lynne has more writing credits than Roy Wood does. They were supposed to be they co-produced the album. They're pretty much partners here. And Jeff Lynne, if you listen to the Idle Race albums, which I have casually, you can hear the influence that Jeff Lynne brings to the move. If you listen to Idle Race, you can hear some move sound from Looking On and Message from the Country. So Jeff Lynne brought something to the move. He wasn't just a hired gun. So when they created this project together, they were like Lennon and McCartney, for example, right? Like they were both kind of leading this project together. They were both multi-instrumentalists, and they were both excellent pop songwriters who were into a lot of different kinds of music. Roy was getting a lot of the publicity when they were doing interviews. People were asking him all the questions. I think there was even stuff that was misprinted saying that Roy had written 105.38 Overture and things like this, right? So I think some of that stuff was getting a little bit to Jeff. Now, it is true that Don Arden managed the band, and from Roy Wood's own voice, which I believe you can hear an interview with Roy Wood from the time talking about this in real time, that he believed that Don Arden was purposefully driving a wedge between Jeff and Roy, because Roy's view of it was, you've got these two great pop songwriters. Why not have them in two different bands and make twice the amount of money? Why have them in both of them in one band? So Roy's perspective is that Don was kind of driving a wedge between the two of them. There were personality clashes between Jeff and Roy as well. They were playing together in ELO during the time of the recording of ELO II in Europe and things like this. Apparently there was a big dust up at a show in Italy where they had a big argument. They actually announced a cancellation of the show to the audience. And they didn't announce why, but apparently backstage there was a fight between Roy and Jeff over who would go onto the stage first and who would go onto the stage last. Like apparently this had happened, and they almost canceled the show. I think somebody got a hold of them both and pretty much like got them to go on and play begrudgingly. Anyways, Roy left shortly after that. And at this point, from Roy's words, he said that part of the reason why he left was because he did respect Jeff and got along with him as a friend. And he wanted to leave before it got even worse, to where they had a big falling out, because they remained pretty chummy over the years. I mean, Roy was at the ELO Hall of Fame introduction at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Roy was there. He played, him and Jeff did some songwriting, I think in the late 80s or early 90s. They got back together, did some stuff. They remained chums over the years. And I think Roy says, like, I had to leave or else it would have damaged the relationship between us during those recording sessions. Anyways. And it is interesting, just to go on where he went, it is interesting that he went on to do Wizard, and it was the right move because, you know, Wizard, even though they didn't break in the States, they were very popular overseas in the UK or whatever. They had a lot of hits. In fact, See My Baby Jive was a #1 hit, and it was one of the top 100 hits of the 1970s in the UK or of the BBC charts or whatever, right? So it was a big deal, like, it was a successful commercial move for Roy to go on and to do that project and to lead that project. And there were a little bit of digs too. I mean, they put out a single, Bend Over Beethoven, which was kind of a dig at Roll Over Beethoven by ELO. And then apparently it got to Jeff and Jeff Lynne and stuff like this. But Roy says they were friendly digs. They weren't trying to be heated. The interesting thing is there's an interview with Roy from right after he left ELO. And he talked about how the move would continue. He said he was forming a new band. He left ELO. The move would continue as a recording project. And he actually foresaw, like, this is him. You can find this on YouTube. He talked about possibly even playing a show that would be headlined by ELO with Roy Wood's new band opening or something like this. Like, he talks about it. So it's interesting that dynamic of here he is leaving the band, but he's still in a band with Jeff and Bev, the move, which eventually dissolved. And that he was talking about, yeah, I might still even play shows with ELO as my new band, which wasn't Wizard yet. Anyways, it's convoluted. The record contracts let them dissolve the move so that they could move on and put all of their attention into ELO and Wizard, respectively. ELO II. So this is where we're getting at with ELO II. So I'm a humongous Roy Wood fan, and I love Wizard, and like, I do like to think like what would have happened if he had stayed in the band, but you can't really ask that question with ELO II because he was still very much involved with ELO while ELO II was being recorded. In fact, he played on and was part of the arrangement of some of the songs, including In Old England Town Tonight and From the Sun to the World. He played bass and cello on both of those tunes, and they played those songs live with Roy. So there's actually live, they play, and one of them, In Old England Town Tonight, there's a live video of with Roy. So he was pretty involved. If he had stayed through the completion of the album, you may have seen a Roy Wood or two vocal on the album that would have added to it. But sound-wise, production-wise, song arrangement, song track listing would have been pretty similar. So it's more, if you play the game of what would ELO have been like if Roy would have stayed, you kind of have to look at ELO 3 and on, right? So not ELO 3, but you know what I mean, like the third album and on. Anyways, so back to ELO 2. So Roy leaves ELO to salvage his relationship with the guys in the band, and he continued on with Bev. They actually did a lot of stuff in the late 70s and early 80s and stuff like this. They did a move, they reformed the move in the 80s for a little bit, which is interesting. That's a whole nother story. But anyways, so ELO 2, you have Jeff Lynne producing. The first album was produced by Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne. The second album is just produced by Jeff Lynne. They have the cover of Roll Over Beethoven, but it's interesting if you go back and watch some of their live performances. They did, what was the other cover that they did before that? With the piano, Jerry Lee Lewis. What was that song? Instead of piano, they did strings. There's a live version of it with Roy even.
Great Balls of Fire?
Great Balls of Fire. They did Great Balls of Fire as ELO with Roy Wood with the string section, and it didn't quite sound right. So I think with Roll Over Beethoven, they kind of they wanted to do like a classic rock cover from a 1950s rock song, and I think they got it more right with Roll Over Beethoven than Great Balls of Fire. But if you look at the track listing, I mean, it's 5 tracks. One of them's a cover, and 2 of the songs Roy Wood played on. So I mean, he's pretty much on this album. There's another interesting thing because they put out an anniversary edition that had a version of Mama, which was sung by Carl Wayne, which is just, when you go in the weeds of that, it kind of freaks you out a little bit. That Carl Wayne
wait. Give me more info on that.
Yeah, there was an anniversary album of ELO II, which came out, I think, the 40th or 50th anniversary, and it had like a bonus CD with bonus tracks. Yeah. And apparently Carl Wayne was in the studio recording with ELO, and Carl Wayne, I think, does a lead vocal, I think, on 3 tracks on the ELO II anniversary album. And one of them is a version of Mama, which is the second track on the album, which is a pretty, maybe, I guess, the most commercial sounding song on ELO II. But anyways.
What was the reason they brought Carl in? Do you know?
I believe that there was something to do, and it's funny because I think this actually happened after Roy left. I think Carl was in the studio, which is weird that Carl was in the studio after Roy had left, but I guess Bev was still there, so that's still the move. Anyway, So I think what it happened to do was I think ELO was actually supporting Carl with some recordings, and I think 2 of the songs were supposed to be Carl Wayne songs, with ELO kind of backing him up to support him and help him out. And he ended up doing a rendition of Mama. Those songs were never released until this anniversary album. So it was kind of a moot point. This Carl Wayne's stuff never ended up coming out anyways, but he was working with them for some reason. Yeah. So Jeff, they were more kind of backing him up, and they recorded stuff with him, and it ended up on the anniversary thing.
But, if you think about it, all these guys all knew each other. It's not, I'm not surprised. I just never heard about that. I had no idea. And for those who don't know who Carl Wayne was the quote unquote the original lead singer of the Move. So
yeah, and somebody commented Carl Wayne joined the Hollies too, which is wild. He was in the Hollies in the 2000s.
Yeah, later
for a few years. He was the lead singer, which is cool. After their lead singer retired. Where was I going? Okay, ELO II. I do want to talk about post ELO II a little bit, but I'll let Parish and you tell your get to the album. ELO II.
Okay.
I like ELO II a lot. I think it's even more experimental than the first album. I think it's definitely more progressive. There's only 5 tracks and they're all like 8 minutes long. Although, again, oddly enough, it's kind of like commercial, like Mama, Roll Over Beethoven, are kind of like poppy songs that are progressive, and there's the orchestral element to it as well. But I like every track off of this album. Kuama, From the Sun to the World. I really like the first track in Old England Town, which they did live with Roy. Like I said, there's video of that one. For me, this is just a follow-up and more of the first album, but even more experimental. Well, actually, that's not true. The first album is more experimental in some ways. This is more progressive in other ways. So like for me, that's kind of how I see this one. It's a continuation of the first album. Roy is still pretty involved. even though he didn't end up being there to the completion. And to me, I think it's just like, I like it as much as the first album. And I think it has some really cool songs that even kind of sound move-ish as well. So for me, again, Mr. Radio from the first album is the most ELO sounding, even more than anything off the second album, in my opinion. But I would give the second album right up there, maybe only because it has only 5 songs. I'd probably give it a 7.5. But it's, for me, it's right up there with ELO I. It's just a continuation of it, but a little bit less Roy Wood. And that's, to me, I guess I'll ding it for that.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to ding it because it doesn't have Roy on it. But when I listen to this record, it really it's starting to have that Jeff Lynne tone, as opposed to the debut, which is totally Roy. It's just kind of in that Jeff's still trying to get things figured out. I think, it doesn't have that much of the move sound anymore. I don't hear it, even though with, Roy on a couple of tracks, it's just kind of like a transitional phase. That's kind of how I look at it between till you get, the ELO III, the third album, this is just kind of a transitional thing. So you would give this, go ahead.
I'd give it a 7.5. I kind of think like Old England Town Tonight kind of reminds me of a sister to Overture, and Overture is kind of a sister to Message from the Country. You see where I'm going? So I can kind of see some connections still a little bit, but this is like they're now transitioning away from the move. So you're right about that for sure. Right. And they're still not even what they become with ELO later, which is so it's an even more it's an interesting time period and record for sure.
I do think when you listen to Roll Over Beethoven, I can hear a lot of what's going to come though. With the string sections and the way it's arranged, it does sound. I could see the future, because
that was a live staple too for them.
Yeah, but I think Roy had a different way to arrange things, and I hear more Roy's arrangement of the instrumental stuff more than I hear Jeff. And when you hear Roll Over Beethoven, I think I hear more way Jeff kind of works. It's really a fascinating record the way it kind of plays out. So 7.5. Parish, what's your thoughts on this record?
Well, it's interesting hearing Marcos speak because I think this one sounds much more ELO than the first one, and I think you can hear the progression from the first one coming into this, and I think the reason for that is this sounds more like a band. So you've now got Richard Tandy on keyboards, and you can hear it. You can hear him. You can hear his piano synthesizer, and it sounds like sounds like what he does. And whilst not credited, Hugh McDonald on the cello is on this album as well. So Bevan, I think, shines through a lot more with the drum playing on this album than he did on the first one. So I think there's an element of you can hear the band now that becomes the core ELO band for the future. And I think it's a great album. I mean, it is weird, and I guess it is progressive, but I wouldn't have thought of it as a prog rock album at the time. I would never have put it in there with Yes or Genesis or anything like that. I think with hindsight, because it's got the long songs and it's not overtly commercial in parts, we probably now categorise things like that as prog. But I don't think I would have called it prog at the time. Old England Town, Boogie Number 2. I think it's really good. It's got I suppose it's a concept. It sounds like it could be a concept album because quite a few of the songs have got stories to them. And that first one has definitely got a story to it, although I'm not entirely sure what the story is.
I don't either.
It sort of meanders a bit, but clearly there's a story in there somewhere. And it's very dramatic, and you can hear that musicianship coming through now. I think with the players I've just said. Mama, I think it's fantastic. I mean, that to me does sound like ELO. Although there's bits of it, I mean, bizarrely, and again, I'm not sure if he's an artist that did well in the States, but it reminds me in parts of Gilbert O'Sullivan. Did Gilbert O'Sullivan do anything over there? No.
I think Gilbert or Sullivan had like one hit. He might be considered a one-hit wonder, but that's it.
So, and he would have been a contemporary at this time. So there's a bit of it reminds me of that. It's very emotional. I assumed it'd been written about Jeff Lynne's mother dying, but actually reading up on it today, that's not the case at all. But it certainly sounds very emotional. So I'd assume that was the case. Roll Over Beethoven, I just think is fantastic. I always have done it. It's almost like their mission statement for what ELO is going to be about, really, combining rock and roll with classical music. And I think the way they did that, and the way they have the cello and the violins and the everything kicking in, I just think it's fantastic. And it's for 9 minutes. It always feels like it's only 3 to me. It just rips through it, so quickly. And I suppose it's a bit like Cheap Trick with Ain't That a Shame, that they kind of turned it into their own song. And I think Cheap Trick did that with Ain't That a Shame as well. So they've made it their own song, really, such that I think nowadays most people would know of Roll Over Beethoven as an ELO song, certainly in the UK, than they would have Chuck Berry's song. And it got to number 6, so another hit for them off the album, and was a modest hit in the US at number 42. So they started to get a hit. From the Sun to the World, Boogie number 1. Another story to it, this time about the future. I love that sort of boogie piano in the middle. I think, as I said earlier, it really shows off Richard Tandy's keyboard skills. I suppose this does have kind of changes through it. So maybe that's the prog bit coming in now, that it doesn't sound the same all the way through. But again, the bit that's commercial sounds like ELO. And the last song, which I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced, Kurama. Again, sounds like, to me, certainly in the first part of the song, sounds very ELO to me. And it's only really when they go into the more classical music pieces that I think it kind of moves away from what they became later. So yeah, again, another album I've listened to for years. As I say, I got it in the pack. Obviously, the album cover was the start of their love of doing things about space and spaceships that would become their focal point for the future. And yeah, I think it's a really good album. The other thing I'd say, which is probably worth mentioning, the first 2 albums were on Harvest. Yeah. And after this album, they went on to Jet, and Jet was obviously Don Arden's record label. So clearly, they were being moved that way by Don Arden onto his music, onto his record label. So, what would I rate it? I think I'd probably rate it. Probably a bit like Marco. I think it's as good as the first album. It just needs a few extra songs. So I'll probably give it a 7 because it could do with a few extra songs. But if you were to add the bonus tracks that came when it came out on CD a few years ago, and that includes a couple of tracks which has got Mark Bolan on, because apparently Mark Bolan was recording in the studio next door, and he came in and did some stuff with them. And so if I was to do the one with the bonus tracks, I'd give it an 8. But if we're just doing the original album, I'll give it a 7.
Yeah, I've got this is just the original.
It's the American cover.
Yeah, it's the American cover, just on Epic.
I don't
have the remastered
cover better or whatever.
I like this cover better. Yeah, I do.
Well, it's what you get. As I say, I saw that.
I like the other cover better.
For a year.
You do?
Yeah.
The other cover, I think that's Hypnosis. Hypnosis did the first 2 albums.
Yeah,
I do want to. I would like to clarify something before we get to Grant. When I say I still hear the Move in ELO II. I guess what I'm saying is Jeff Lynne had an influence on the Move. So when if you go back and listen to the song "What" from Looking On, that easily could have been on ELO 1 or 2, like no question. So I guess because I came from that Jeff Lynne, Roy Wood version of the move, I still go, oh yeah, this could have been on Looking On, or this song from Looking On could have been on ELO 2. You know what I mean? When we get a little bit later, there's stuff that Jeff Lynne did with ELO later that I could never see the move doing. So I guess that's kind of when 100%. I say, where I'm like, yeah, some of these songs kind of commingle with Looking On and Message from the Country, and a song like What from Looking On could have been on ELO 2. And I don't think history would have batted an eye at that. Go back and listen to What. It sounds like an ELO 1 or 2 song. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify.
I just hear a lot less of Roy on here, even though he's on 2 tracks. It really starts to sound more like what Jeff Lynne's about, where the first album just sounds like Roy to me all the way. Whatever. Even if it's a Jeff song, I just hear that imprint of Roy Wood with the cellos and the way he arranges things, and it just sounds like Roy, for what it's worth. Anyway, I don't think I can add any more than what you gentlemen already did about it. I think if I was going to rate this, do I like it more than the debut? Some days I kind of like it better. Some days I don't. I think I'd be comfortable giving it a probably 7.5. And yeah, I mean, it's fine. There are aspects of it that I like more, because I like what Jeff did with ELO. I think his vision for it really was, it could be experimental, but then it could be commercial, but it could be very, thrilling to listen to and captivating. And this is one step towards that. Is it better than the debut? I wouldn't say so. It's just a little bit different. It's just like a stepping stone. Anyway, now I'm going to open it up to everybody in the chat. What would you rank this out of 10? Go. And I'm ready. I'm ready to take it in. See what we've got. And by the way, okay, Steven's going to the 6.9. It's 6.9, huh? Tyler's going 7.5. Al 7.5. See, we're all going to line up. Zappa 6.75. Byron 6.5. Nathan's 9. Look at Nathan. Zane 6.5. Rand's going with an 8. Look at Rand. Ken, solid 7.5. Okay. Look at the numbers, baby. Louder Than Life. I'm a huge ELO fan, but 2 is my least favorite. I give it a 4.5. Okay. Jan's going with an 8. Graham's going with an 8. For me, 8, thinking the time it came out. Okay, that's fair. Wow, you guys, we've really got some scores on here. Real quick, anybody else?
Grant, at the scores?
Well, kinda. I think this is going to rate higher. Anybody else have one, and we'll do the tally. I think we're ready. That's pretty good. All right, let's calculate. We've got. Wait a minute. What did I? Oh, Grant, you can't put that like that. Helps if you have your glasses on. I made a 75. It should have been a 7.5. Okay, here we go. Okay, well. Let me put my glasses on. 7. That's a 7.5. Okay. Let's see what we got. Okay, well. All right, I guess I'm kind of surprised. It comes up with a 7.14.
That's fair, I think.
Yeah, we did have a couple
skew
of numbers.
Especially this one, I thought would skew a little bit lower, to be honest. But
no, it's about the same. We've got more more people have voted on this one. Brian's going to go with I'll give it a 6 for spelling the name correctly on the cover. Okay. Well, I'll take your 6. I don't think. No, I already got Brian's. No, I didn't get Brian on there. Let's put Brian's. It's not going to really change it. Oh, well, kind of did. It went down to a 7. 7.07. All right. So maybe it didn't rank as high as the debut. I don't know. You never know what you're going to get when you do these things. But I mean, I guess the thing is, if you're going to start out here, would you start out here? You know,
if you were going to recommend ELO to somebody who's never heard them,
yeah,
I probably wouldn't. I would probably recommend getting a greatest hits.
Yeah,
I think it depends what else they like. So I think there's enough on this album that I'd recommend it to people who I knew liked sort of longer songs and more progressive rock and. But if it was somebody who was more into pop, then I definitely wouldn't recommend it. So I think it depends what they like. But yeah, if my go-to albums that I would recommend, it would be either New World Record or Out the Blue. They're the two I'd suggest people start with, and then work away from that from my point of view. So.
Well, either way, this was a fun exercise. So. We will be doing an ongoing series. So next month we'll be looking at 2 more ELO albums. So we'll be going to see. We'll be hitting. Will we be hitting
on the third day in El Dorado?
On the third day in El Dorado. So we'll be looking at next month. What would you recommend? Who would you recommend early Pink Floyd to somebody? Would you recommend? Oh, I love early Pink Floyd. What are you talking about? Syd Barrett era? Oh, come on. I love it. I would recommend it, but if you're listening to Dark Side or Wish You Were Here, you know, the early stuff, Piper doesn't sound anything like those records. Or, you know, second album. All right. Well, DC, I don't know when you'll have time. All right. I want to thank everybody in the chat. I want to thank the panel tonight, Marco, and I want to thank the Parish. We will be back next month, and we'll be doing the same kind of thing. So, and we will want to hear from you. Oh, ELO Entry Point, good compilation. Then, well, I'd start out with whatever greatest hits, and then, yeah, probably a new world record.
I started with I can't remember the name of it, but there was like a double disc greatest hits. That was my introduction. Like I'd already had the Move albums, but I grabbed this double disc.
Is it the one with the purple cover? Kind of a purple cover?
I don't remember, but it had Showdown on it. It had a lot of songs. So Serious, I think, was on it. One of the
that's certainly. I mean, that's the latest greatest hits, and that's definitely worth getting as an introduction.
Hey, Graham, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it. There you go. See you, Jan. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to the rest. Yeah, we'll be back next month. Next show. It's true. We will be back.
True. Yeah.
All right, boys. All right, panel. We'll see you. And everybody in the chat, have a good evening. It's Monday. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow night, we will be looking at Eric Hansen and DC will be here, and we'll be doing our top 10 America tracks. And then Wednesday on the Contrarians, we will be doing the Contrarians live chat at 7 p.m. There's all kinds of stuff. And then next week, nothing's going to be happening because I'll be on the 80s cruise. So everything's going to shut down. So, all right, we'll see you. Have a good one. We'll see everybody.